Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Well, hi there, it's Matthew Blades, and let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt like, I know what to do, but why can't I do it? What's getting in the way of me achieving this thing? Because I think that a lot of folks out there are pretty smart, and you've got to figure it out, and you know better, but you just don't do better. So today's episode is for you. We're going to bring in Dr. Dave, our resident psychiatrist. Hey, man. And have this conversation. We're kind of picking back up on where we left off last week. You know, you're kind of giving us this master class on metacognition right now. And I felt like that was a really appropriate title. I know better, but why can't I do it? And I have a story that I want to share with everybody here in just a couple of moments. But before we jump into quad 2 and the pickup today, can you give us a really brief recap of last week's episode, just in case somebody missed it?
Yeah. Well, we talked about awareness developing before control. And we also touched on some of the things that get in the way of being able to control things, like prior trauma, sleep deprivation, burnout. You know, so when things wear down the system, you kind of default back to old patterns, and so that's a factor that's involved with making it difficult. But there are a bunch of other factors that are involved too that we wanted to really take the time to go through today. If I can start with just kind of a piece about how the brain works in this regard, that'll help to maybe spell out how difficult it is to change.
I love it. That's why you're here.
So there was a concept that came out from the epilepsy literature called kindling theory. So the idea goes,
right? Kindling, like kindling wood, kindling
like
fire.
kindling wood, exactly. And so what would happen with seizures is that many times people that would develop epilepsy, when they wired them up with an EEG and monitored their brain activity, sometimes they would detect low-level seizure activity that hadn't risen to the point of a full-blown seizure. So in other words, that those pathways in the brain that were leading to seizure were kind of working behind the scenes on a sub-threshold level and becoming strengthened over time through repetition to the point where they would eventually hit that threshold and turn into a full-blown seizure. So now this idea of kindling theory, you know, where you have low-level circuits in the brain are acting on a low level sub-threshold and becoming stronger over time. This idea has become more generalized now to pretty much how we learn. So the other phrase that is frequently used is the nerves that fire together wire together. So when you start down a pathway in the brain, the more you use it, the neighboring nerves start to get recruited into strengthening the signal. So you can think of it like if you have a dirt hill and you start pouring water on the top of the hill and the water's running down, it starts cutting a path. The more water you run down that hill, the path becomes wider and wider to the point where it becomes, you know, real erosion. And if you take it out to the extreme, you have the Grand Canyon. Right. So the more you use a pathway, the more it recruits neighboring nerves. And the opposite is also true. If you don't do something for a long time and you're not strengthening those neural pathways, the brain starts to pick off some of those nerves and use them for other things. So if, you know, when people talk about feeling rusty, you know, you haven't done something for a while and you're kind of rusty at it. Yeah, you've actually lost neural connections to that activity or that process. And through lack of use, it becomes weaker over time.
Okay, great. Let me set this up with a quick story. I was visiting with a gentleman a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about how he's working on his anger issues. He has always been really quick to anger. And, you know, this was a very long conversation that I'm going to really try to summarize here in just a couple of moments. But you know, I think what we got to the root of after kind of like going back and forth on this is, in some ways, this is how he protects himself, right? Because he doesn't have to become emotionally invested if he can just piss off the people around him and then, kind of see this is true. And you and I have talked a lot about that in the past. And, I actually brought up our episode of metacognition with him. And I said, I think you should start paying attention to this series, because an episode like today is kind of perfect for somebody like that, who's inclined to go to a certain emotion all the time. Like I titled it, I know better, but why can't I change? And so I kind of, we went back and forth, and we talked a lot about this anger thing, but I thought, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels like that's a good entry point, because anger is one of those emotions that a lot of people go to almost by default. And
Right.
I'll bet if we asked almost all of them, they would prefer not to have that be their default emotion. I know some people understand that anger may be causing some of the problems in their life, but for whatever reason, they just can't find a way to hit that pause button long enough for that to be maybe a secondary feeling or emotion
Right.
versus the primary feeling or emotion. So, hearing that story, where does that make you want to go next?
Well, I had 5 areas that I wanted to cover today,
Let's do it.
and your example is number 5 on the list, so we don't necessarily have to take these in order. But the idea of jumping to anger and being aware that it's hard to let go of that. Sometimes the strong emotional reaction that people have, it it has some secondary benefits to it. So jumping to anger can make you feel powerful in the situation, where maybe otherwise if you didn't come forward with an angry reaction, you might feel powerless in the situation. And
Mm,
these reactions go back to childhood. There was some point in the past where this reaction made sense in the context of the relationship at the time. And then through repetition, they become kind of wired in, and then it's hard to give them up. But anger can make you feel powerful. Anxiety in situations can feel protective, because you're thinking through all the things that could possibly go wrong. So you've covered all the bases. Um, Control, in terms of like being manipulative with other people and trying to control things constantly, can feel kind of stabilizing, because now you've kind of worked out all the variables. To the other person that's involved, it feels manipulative and off-putting, but for you it can feel stabilizing. And sometimes jumping into rumination can feel responsible, because you're thinking through all the contingencies, and you've planned for everything that could possibly happen. But these can undermine the ability to control yourself in the situation. So jumping quickly to anger, you've already gone through the automatic response, and you see where it's taking you on the other side, and you don't like where it's taking you. So putting that pause in, you have to have a conversation with yourself about, I know that I get angry in this situation, and is there some secondary benefit that keeps this reinforced, that's keeping me from being able to put that pause in and change my behavior?
interesting. Okay, what are you said you mentioned 5 things that you'd like to go over, and in no particular order. So, what feels like it should come next?
Well, emotional avoidance can undermine control. So the other thing that can come up, so jumping to an angry response is one thing, but sometimes your emotional reaction in the situation can be uncomfortable to sit with, right? So the metacognition gives you the awareness of the pattern, it gives you the space for the pause, and then in that pause, an uncomfortable emotion can jump up quickly, and it becomes so uncomfortable that you want to move past it quickly.
Could you
So
give us
an
an
example,
example of that briefly?
I was
Could
just
could
going
you
to
give me an example?
give yeah. So think about a situation like, you were in grade school, and your teacher called on you to answer a question in front of the class, and you were completely unprepared for it, and you felt embarrassed and humiliated in front of all the other students. And then fast forward to adulthood, every time somebody calls you out on something, they want to call you to account for something, your immediate reaction is defensiveness. You get irritated, you get defensive, you start making excuses instead of just pausing for a minute and saying, well, maybe they have a point. Maybe there is something there that I need to take a look at. The reaction is automatic because you're trying to get away from that feeling of embarrassment and humiliation. Now, with all of this stuff, it happens so fast. You're probably not thinking, oh, I feel embarrassed, and that's why I feel like I need to jump in. This is one of those situations where after the fact, you want to go back and take a look at it, especially if you're not making progress with changing things. What is it that happened that kept me from being able to take advantage of that pause, put a little space in there, and choose a different path?
I think that I am guilty of emotional avoidance, or at least I have been in the past, right? Where that feeling shows up and I'm like, oh, maybe it shows up at an inconvenient time.
Mhm.
And so I just stuff it, or I compartmentalize it, or I say I'll deal with it later. But I wonder if I were to go back and look at the scoreboard, it's like all the at bats and all the actual hits,
Right.
how many times did the emotion show up and I said, I'll get back to that later. And I never did get back to it. And I could imagine that could have a compound effect over time, right?
Right. And on the good side, these are old scripts that you've outgrown. Um, these are automatic reactions that are taking you to places that you don't want to go. It's not consistent with who you are now. And that feeling of embarrassment or humiliation, that was based on something that happened a long time ago. You've you've become competent at what you're doing now. You've become more experienced with treating other people well and developing good relationships. That's not who you are anymore, but that old script can still play on, and it's worthwhile sitting with that emotion and kind of letting it wash over you and not automatically reacting to it. And again, if you can't catch it in the moment, at least if you become aware that that's a pattern, you can take some time when the emotions aren't high to look back at it and try to understand it a bit.
Okay. This is good. A couple of more steps to walk through here. And
Yep.
again, all under this umbrella of I feel like I know better, but why can't I actually change? Why can't I actually step into the change? So keep going.
Another one is identity conflicts. So
Okay.
this is your reaction is tied to your identity with who you see yourself as. I'm supposed to be the
Mm,
strong person in the relationship. I'm supposed to be the one who is the protector. I'm supposed to be the one that's more principled or better disciplined. And if you pause in the moment and consider a different strategy, it feels like you're betraying yourself. It feels like you're selling out and not living up to your principle. And that's another one of these after the fact things. You might automatically fall into it, but it's worthwhile taking a look at, if I do change, if I do let go of this thing, is this going to diminish who I am, or is this going to actually take me to a better place? Um, yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Could it go the other way? Because the examples you gave were, I would say, more like powerful positions, and I would imagine it could go the other way too, where like my identity is I'm the submissive one. I'm not the one who's supposed to speak up. I'm not the
Yeah.
one who's supposed to rock the boat, right?
That's a great point. It can go the other way too. And that's one of those things that are worthwhile taking a look at. Do I need to be the one to always say yes to everything?
Right.
Can I say no sometimes and set a boundary that's actually appropriate, and then feel comfortable with taking that stand? Because a lot of times people get into these submissive roles in relationships. It's because they had somebody powerful in their life that kept them down. And so when you set an appropriate boundary, it feels threatening in some ways, like, oh, like, you know, I need to brace myself for what's coming. Maybe nothing's coming other than the respect of the other person because you set a boundary.
Yeah, sure. Well, and then the thing about the boundary is you're the sheriff, so you got to enforce it too.
Mhm.
And that gets challenging, right? Okay, let's keep marching. This is such a good list, and I really love this breakdown because I know people are going to find themselves in one of these categories, and they're going to say, like, my goal, at least with this particular episode, is like, so now we stumble on the reason why. These are the reasons why you can't change. You do know better. You do have this like tug inside of you, this intuition, this feeling that's inside of you that's saying, hey, we should do something different. We should try this another way. But you keep getting stuck because of one of these 5 things.
Right. Well, and another way that people get stuck is through perfectionism.
Oh, guilty. If I can't do it perfect, Dave,
right,
why try?
Well, as we talked about earlier, the nerves that fire together wire together, and that's a process. You're not going to be able to nail this thing overnight. It's going to take time. It's going to take practice. It's going to take repetition. It's going to take little steps. And what can happen is when perfectionism kicks in, you try it a couple of times. You try to catch yourself. You have that moment of metacognition. You see the pattern unfolding in front of you. You think that you tried to maybe change something about it, and it still ended up taking you to the place that you didn't want to go. And you get frustrated and say, oh, this isn't going to work. I'm never going to be able to change this.
Or walk it back. I tried it.
I tried it and it failed. Right.
Yeah.
So walk it back a few steps and broaden your idea of what progress looks like. The fact that you recognized it is progress. The fact that you recognized it and actually tried to change something is progress. Now you failed. Okay, fine. Each time you come back at it and try to do something a little differently, you're making progress toward the goal. And each time you come back at it, it becomes a little easier. You get a little closer to the mark that you were shooting for. Your ability to recognize it earlier and at least initiate the thought process to change it becomes easier. Right. So that's how you have to mark progress, is slow, incremental improvements toward the goal. But you're not going to get it perfect overnight. Nobody does.
Okay. So emotional avoidance, identity conflicts, perfectionism, the fear of losing the reaction. And the last step here as we wind down is what?
Jumping into slow thinking. So instead of developing the control in the moment, you skip right over the control part and start into the slow thinking. So you start looking at the trigger. What was it that actually triggered me? And where in my childhood does this begin? And so you start getting all into your head about the process of what happened instead of actually controlling your reaction to the situation. Right? Does that make sense?
Oh my gosh. I feel like you just described me 10 years ago,
Right.
I mean, really, I mean that before, the healing journey that I went on a few years ago, when I started to unravel a lot of that old programming, as you and I have talked about 1,000 times on this podcast, that used to be me. I get so much in my head about, okay, why do I feel this way? And why am I acting this way? And I could literally just get stuck in that, which would not allow me to act. It would not allow me to do or change anything different.
Right. So and this is true for people that maybe start out in therapy. You start seeing some patterns and it's exciting to see the possibility, and it gets you thinking like, well, was this related to my relationship with my mom? And was this because of this thing that happened to me when I was in grade school or high school? And that thought process becomes a substitute for doing the work of change. Right?
This is
It's important to do this. It's important to look at those patterns and understand them. But there also has to come a time where you say, okay, at some point, it doesn't really matter why it's happening. I see what's happening. I see where it's taking me. And I know that this is repeatable because it happens every time. If I figure out exactly where it came from, it's really not going to matter at the end of the day. What I need to do is figure out what I need to do to get to this other place, which is where I really want to be.
Incredible conversation today, man. And look, for the people that are just joined us on YouTube, go back and start the whole thing. And we're going to post it on all the podcast platforms here. It'll be up in the next half hour for those that want to go back and listen to it. But I don't say this lightly, Dave. This may be one of the more important episodes we've ever recorded together, because this is what gets people stuck. This is where people get in this place in their life where they do know better. They just can't figure out or find out why they can't move past it. And it probably is one of the 5 things: emotional avoidance, identity conflicts, perfectionism, slow thinking, or the fear of losing the reaction. So, man, thank you so much for a great episode today.
Yeah. So just to sum it up,
yeah,
quadrant two is a struggle, right? That's the nature of it. You've developed some amount of awareness, but you haven't quite developed the control yet. So there is going to definitely be a lot of struggle, a lot of work that takes place in quadrant 2. And you're basically building and developing your braking system. You see the threat, but you can't quite stop the car in time before you crash into it. So the process is going to be, you notice, you pause, you make a small change. After the fact, you review the change that you made, and if it's working, if it's the direction that you're needing to go in, you repeat it the next time. And so that's the cycle. And if you keep doing that over time, eventually those pathways become stronger. Just like anything else, if you want to learn to juggle, you're going to be dropping the balls a lot until you get that muscle memory. This is really not different in the way that the brain works and the way that you lay it down. Anything that you practice will become stronger over time.
I say it all the time, Dave. You want to change your life, you have to change your life. And that means doing new things. So this is one of them. Just a quick sneak peek. Next week, we're going to be back and we're going to be jumping into quad 3 of this metacognition. Briefly, what will we be accomplishing next week?
Well, quad 3 is a little different. It's a different animal. So we talked about moving from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2, and then from quadrant 2 you move to quadrant 4. Quadrant 3 goes straight to quadrant 4, but in quadrant 3 you have low awareness and high control. So it's a controlling. You're controlling everything, but there's no feedback loop to take you back to the awareness, and it is a form of automatic behavior. So we'll unpack that next week and take a look at it. And it's particularly tough because a lot of people that are stuck in that don't realize that they're stuck in it.
Yeah. Well, thanks to everybody for checking us out today. Just a reminder, in that top left, you see a QR code, and that QR code takes you straight to our Amazon page where you can pick up a copy of this 6-week wellness course called Revive and Thrive. Dr. Dave and I made it. It's the book that you see right there, right behind me. It's a 6-week wellness course meant to get you going and get you moving on this journey of discovery and ultimately healing, and ultimately helping you land in that place that you want to end up. Each of the weeks builds on each other. It's accompanied by a video series that you scan with your phone and you watch the videos on YouTube. It's really easy to consume. It's a thoughtful workbook that will help you get the results that you're looking for. So I'll encourage you to hit that here as we wrap up. And Dr. Dave, I will see you next week for quad 3 and another episode of our podcast. Thank you so much, bud.
And if I could say one more thing about Revive and Thrive, that fits in well with what we're talking about today. If you're looking for some practical ways that you can try to practice some of these goals that you're working on, the exercises in this program will give you practical things that you can try and practice and get better at.
Love it. Hit the code, and we will see everybody next time. Thanks for watching on YouTube. Thanks for listening along and on your preferred platform, and we'll see you next week. Actually, we'll see you tomorrow with Jill for Guns and Grief here on our Learn from People Who Lived It podcast. That came out a little bit funny, but I think y'all knew what I meant. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care, everybody.